Hi, my name is Kayla, and I'm going to be telling you guys my story and my journey with my own trauma and mental health. And it's a long story and a bit of a doozy at some parts. I do want to preface by saying that I will be talking about sexual assault and abuse, um, and some other things along those lines in that nature. So everything started for me when I was 6 years old, and my biological mom, Melissa, God bless her soul, um, passed away from some sort of cancer. I'm not 100% sure what kind, how it happened, etc. From the bits and pieces I've been able to pull together over the years, I believe it was probably from her smoking. She smoked cigarettes, a lot of cigarettes, and I believe she had lung cancer that spread to her brain. And from diagnosis to death was only 2 weeks, so it was a very short amount of time. And when that happened, I was sent to live with a uncle and an aunt, uncle on my mom's side. And for the first couple years living with them, it was pretty good. There was normal family fights, normal family drama, arguing with them, trying to get away with stuff, being sneaky, and them yelling at me and grounding me and all of that kind of normal family stuff. And then I would say about 2 to 3 years after, it kind of took a turn for the worse, and that is when all of the trauma that I went through started happening. So my aunt and uncle ended up getting a divorce. There was problems with drinking involved, problems with domestic violence, problems with infidelity, you name it, there was those problems. And that really kind of set the tone for the rest of how my younger childhood years were gonna go. And there are some parts where I feel like I can't blame my uncle. He kind of was thrown into having another child and having to care for me and his other children by himself. And because those were my mom's wishes, my mom didn't want me to be with my aunt necessarily because she wasn't blood related. And when they got divorced, I stayed with my uncle because that's what my mom wanted. So the first real traumatic experience after my mom passed away when I was 6 was probably the sexual assault I endured from a cousin, a male cousin, somewhere between the ages of 8 and 12, give or take. I'm not 100% sure, as I've done a lot of blocking those memories and that time of my life out. But somewhere in those ages, I was forced to look at porn with him, and then he would go on to sexually assault me. And at first, it happened few and far between, like once every 6 months or something like that. And it got a little bit more frequent. And it's a really hard thing to kind of come to grasps with as an adult now, because as a little kid, you don't understand what's happening to you. And this is a cousin who would lock me out of the house when I was being babysat by him with my aunt and uncle, and then later on just my uncle was at work or out with friends or at the store, grocery shopping, whatever the case may be, even just working outside in the yard or something. This is a cousin that would, when it was 20 degrees out in Maine in the middle of the winter, he would lure me outside and then run back inside and shut the door and lock it, and then just go upstairs and look through the window at the little porch in the side entrance of the house and just laugh at me and taunt me. And I would be freezing to the point where my whole body was shaking and I was crying and screaming and terrified that I was gonna die out there. He did things like that. He did things like, he was 6 years older than me, so he would do things like lure me out into the woods and make it seem like it was like a fun activity. We're gonna go for a walk, we're gonna go for a hike, let's go explore, and then when we got out of the woods, he would book it just far enough so that I couldn't see him, but he could still see me. And I thought I was lost in the great wilderness. This was like I said, in Maine. They had tons of acreage right on the front side of a mountain face, and it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. There was more than once where I genuinely felt like I was going to either die in the woods or die of hypothermia or something. I just it was not a good situation. So as a child, when he would bring me into his room and try to do those things with me and to me, my instinct was to go with it and make the best of it. As long as I wasn't standing outside in that freezing cold, as long as I wasn't being left in the middle of the woods somewhere, anything was better than that. At least I was inside a house. I had warmth. I had food. Eventually, one of my family members were gonna come home and he wouldn't be able to doing those things anymore. And that's a very confusing thing to try to process as you grow older, and you feel guilt. You feel like, why didn't I do more? Why didn't I say no? But like I said, it was easier to just go with it than it was to fight and end up outside in negative 20 degrees weather. So that went on for a while, and when the instances started to get more and more frequent, I ended up telling one of my biological aunts about it, and she was outraged, and she addressed it right away, which was great. And she made me show her where he kept his folder of porn. So this was back in the earlier 2000s, so there wasn't just laptops and iPads and computers available at every corner. So he printed out these photographs and would make me look at them with him. And it was in a purple folder up on the top shelf in his closet, and I will never remember what that folder looked. I will never forget what that folder looked like. And she made me point it out to him, and I did, and that was kind of like the confirmation of like, oh, she's telling the truth, because obviously he denied everything I said. And that was pretty much all that was done about it. From my memory, he was grounded. I guess there's a possibility that things were done that I didn't know about because I was still very young. I don't know if they made him go to counseling. I don't know if they had further conversations about it. I have no idea. But what I do remember is that after that, I was still left alone with him by myself. And he stopped doing those things after that. And there were times when they tried to make sure that someone was there. Either I was at an after school program, or someone was with us, or that someone was home, but there were still times where they left me alone with him after that. And I was terrified. Terrified. The older I got, the more I realized of like what was happening, and like that it wasn't okay. And then from there, I'm not exactly sure what happened from there. I know that my cousin went to some schools where he stayed at, or he got in trouble with the law a lot, and then ended up living with his mom, who was my aunt but not my biological aunt, and I stayed with my uncle. And my uncle ended up going through a steady stream of different girls, different girlfriends, and a few I liked, and a few helped me be a better person and a better kid, and more of a normal environment. And some also were the complete opposite. Some were nightmares. And one of those nightmares, he ended up getting pregnant and having a beautiful little girl with, but she was one of the most toxic people to this day that I have ever met in my entire life. I was constantly getting screamed at, constantly getting spanked. And again, I'm still around this time, I'm probably around age 10 to 13. Constantly getting spanked, being left home alone all the time. And one of the most prominent memories I have is while my uncle was at work one day. I was home alone with her and her other children, and I did something that she didn't like. I don't remember. It could have been not doing a chore. It could have been I mouthed off. It could have been I ruined something of hers. I have no clue what it was. It could have been something that deserved a punishment, for sure. But the punishment I received was not of that. Nothing I could have done. No child deserves to be beat. I did something. I ended up walking into my room. I slammed the door behind me, and she did not like that. So she came in barreling after me with a shoe, beating the living pulp out of me with the shoe in her fists. And she was pregnant at the time, and the only thing I could think to do to overpower her was to kick her in the belly. And as terrible as I know that that might sound at its face, I was this little girl curled up in a corner of my bedroom with a full-grown adult woman standing over me, beating me with her fist, with her shoe, screaming that I was a piece of shit, that I was worthless, that I was the reason that her and my uncle fought all the time, that she wished my uncle never got me. It was really bad. And when I kicked her belly just enough kind of to get her attention to it, I wasn't trying to hurt her or her child, her unborn child, but just enough to get her to stop and kind of like snap out of this like trance that she was in. She stopped and walked away after that. And I immediately grabbed a pair of sneakers and ran outside the house and was trying to walk to another of my uncle's ex-girlfriend's house, who was one of the ones that I actually liked and was a great human. And on that way there, I called my uncle and ended up somewhere along the lines, and the police ended up getting involved. And it kind of came down to I was not going to be around this woman anymore. I refused. So there might have been other circumstances involved in the reason that he decided to move out, but somewhere around there, he got a different house, and they split up and then got back together behind everybody's back, and then split up and got back behind everybody's back, but I was out of that house. So he moved us into another house, and that's when another set of traumatic events started happening. So he worked a lot. He definitely was always a hard worker. I will give him that, and he worked a lot. But it got to the point of excessiveness where he was starting to leave me alone for hours and hours and hours as a 10, again, in that range, 10 to 13-year-old range, for hours at a time. And of course, 13-year-olds, yeah, it's probably not a big deal if they stay home for a couple hours by themselves, but this was every day from morning to early morning the next day. I was cooking all of my own food when there was food in the house, and when that food wasn't being locked up and kept from me. I was habitually fat shamed as a young girl, which to this day has still impacted my self-esteem incredibly. I have one memory of calling my godmother and crying because he and I were sitting down eating dinner, and I had a glass of milk, like Nesquik, you know, the powder you scoop into the milk, mix it, tastes delicious. I had a glass of chocolate milk and I wanted another one. And he told me that I was too big and I couldn't have that much sugar. And when he walked away to go to the bathroom, I snuck a couple more scoops of that Nesquik and made myself another glass of chocolate milk. 10, 11-year-old girl, I just wanted chocolate milk, man, you know? So when he came back and realized that I had given myself more chocolate milk, he told me that I was unhealthy and that my eating habits were out of control, and he made me call my godmother and wanted her opinion on that, because I have always thought highly of her and she's always kind of been a protector of me since my mom passed away. So I called my godmother, and my godmother was kind of like, it's chocolate milk. Like, is this really happening right now? She just wanted chocolate milk. I don't see what the problem is. And she kind of had to, from my point of view, she kind of had to be like, oh, okay, to try to get my uncle to kind of calm down and whatnot. And from that point on, he started locking up all of the food in the house. So the only things that were really available to me were drinks and maybe a few snacks here and there. But he would put all of the food in his room and then padlock his room and then proceed to leave me for 10 to 15 hours on end. And I was starving. I was so hungry all the time. And I had an amazing friend in school that lived kind of like, it was across the street and then you had to walk for a while. But she would always meet me halfway and bring me back to her house. And her parents would make me dinner and let me sleep over there and stuff like that. So that's kind of how I lived for probably close to a good year. I was just always at her house, and her parents always fed me. And why they never called the police or inquired more into what was going on, I don't know. But yeah, so at some point after that, I ended up, so at that time I was living in New Hampshire, and my family's from Massachusetts, and my biological family is from Massachusetts, and all of my other aunts and stuff were still in Massachusetts. And every summer, my uncle would kind of ship me off so that he could get a break, which I get. He's a middle-aged guy raising a young kid again, and it kind of just got thrown in his lap. So I got that he wanted me to go away from the summer and he could just work and have a little bit of time to himself, and I would be able to visit with my other family members and so on and so forth. So it usually ended up where I would spend a week or two at my godmother's house, which was the best times of my life, and a week or two at one of my aunt's house, which was also always fun. It was always fun being there. But that summer, I was about to be going into 8th grade, and that summer he dropped me off. I spent 2 weeks with my godmother, 2 or 3 weeks with my aunt, and then we got this phone call that he was in Florida and working, and something had happened. He lost his wallet and couldn't get back, or some weird, crazy makeshift story. And he was really we would later come to find out that he was really visiting the abusive ex-girlfriend, the one that had beat me, and didn't want anybody to know that that's what he was doing. So he's lying and neglecting his responsibilities to take care of me and pawning me off on other people. And at first it wasn't a big deal because like I said, I loved being at my godmother's when I was younger. I still do. It's like a little piece of paradise. And then my aunt was always great. I love spending time with her. But then he called my aunt and said that he had set up, my aunt was a school teacher, so she wasn't able to keep me past a certain point. She had to go back to work. She had her own family to deal with, and it just wasn't what she had signed up for, not what had been discussed. It was confusing because he was lying and the story didn't really make sense. So he ended up calling my aunt and saying that, oh, I have some close friends from when he used to live in Massachusetts that offered to take Kayla for another week or two until I can get back to Massachusetts and get her. And Kayla knows them. Kayla knows them so well. It's no big deal at all. She'll have so much fun. And then before my aunt talked to me, my uncle got on the phone and made me lie and said, I need you to tell your aunt that you know these people and that you're fine with going there. And my uncle was never physically abusive to me. He spanked me for sure, and he did all the other abusive things and the neglectful things, and the fat shaming, verbally abusive, I suppose, but he was never, he never beat me or anything like that. But he was a scary man, and he had a way of manipulating people, to kind of do his bidding and believe his story. And when he got on that phone with me and told me I needed to lie to my aunt and I needed to stay there and just to give him a little bit more time to get home, I just said okay. And I was afraid of, if I didn't say okay, what would happen? So I lied to my aunt and I told her, oh yeah, I know these people. It's no big deal. My aunt dropped me off at this house, which was actually a complete stranger's house to me. I had never met these people in my life, maybe once or twice when I was super little. But I did not know them. I had no relationship with them. I was walking into a strange husband and wife's house and just supposed to stay there. It was terrifying. I had no idea when he was coming, if he was coming, and it was a very strange situation. And when that kind of happened, I gave it a few days, and then another one of my aunts, my mom's other sister, came and took me out for dinner, and I told her everything that had been going on since I'd basically lived with my uncle. She obviously already knew about the sexual assault from my cousin, but I told her about all of the days that he was just constantly gone, about him locking food up, about the things that he would say to me when I ate food, about the constant revolving door of women that were coming in and out of our house, and the fact that I didn't know the people I was staying with and that they were actually complete strangers to me. And then, like I said, it later came out once I told her. She confronted him, and it came out that he had been lying. He was in Florida with the ex-girlfriend that was abusive to me, and CPS got involved, and it kind of became my choice of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And I just knew I needed to get out of my uncle's care. He was a sick man. I think that his heart was pure. I think that in the root of all that is, he had a genuine heart, and he had some great aspects to himself. And I do have some great memories with him. I have memories of being at the house in Maine and dancing around the living room, standing on his toes, and he would spin me around. And those are great memories, but unfortunately the negative outweigh the good for me. And I needed to get out. I could not spend another month alone in that house. I was going crazy. I was sad. I was scared. Like I said, I was always hungry. And I just knew that it was not a good and healthy and right situation. So it came down to one of my aunts offered to take me in. And so did the people that I had been staying with, the strangers that I didn't know. And these strangers, I think that they are both also good people at heart. I think they had a weird marriage and a weird dynamic. But it felt safer than being with my uncle. They had other children, and it was nice to just be around people. You know what I mean? Like, to not be alone all the time, to be able to have access to food, to not be told I was fat at 10 years old. So I ended up choosing to stay with them. My aunt I love her to death, and she has the kindest heart. But she had a very specific way, or she has a specific way of living that when I was 10, I knew if I went with her, it's nothing bad. I knew if I went with her, I was going to have to follow rules and strict rules. And, I didn't want to do that. So at 12, 13 years old, I chose to go with the option that seemed funner, honestly, and easier. And hindsight 2020, maybe that wasn't the best decision, but you know, I was 13 years old. What do you expect? So CPS got involved, and I ended up choosing to stay with the people that had taken me in, the strangers. And again, same situation. At first it was okay, and then they ended up separating, getting a divorce, and I went with the woman. And she had a lot of similar behaviors to my uncle. There was a lot of PTSD type things that came in. There was a revolving door of men coming in and out of her life. I was always left alone with her other children, and kind of a babysitter, which was not only overwhelming, but just I felt like I was repeating stuff that I had already been through. So that happened, and then we ended up moving into a different house, and it got to the point where I was actually concerned for not only my safety, but her girl's safety. At one point, where there was one night she had a guy come over, and one of her other children who was younger than me had got up to like use the bathroom or something like that, and I had watched the guy come out of her bedroom and go into the other children's room. And I'm watching there, and he's just standing in the door. He didn't go in, he like all the way, he didn't do anything, but that's creepy. Like, this is like a one night stand or a guy she had seen a couple times out at bars or dinner dates or stuff like that, and he's looking in on other children, watching them sleep and following one of the other children back from the bathroom. And it was creepy and it was terrifying, and I was just like, you know what, this is not okay. And at this point I was 15, 16ish years old. And I actually I had met, and I'm going to say this, and for people that know me and know my story and know my family, you'll laugh. People that don't are going to think it's very disturbing, but I will explain. I had met at the time, what we have always joked and said, my brother boyfriend, at school, and he and I were dating, and right around that same time is when stuff started to get really bad with that family that I was living with. Not only the stuff with the men, kind of like a revolving door, but always having to be, I was basically a mother to her other children at times. And again, the food, there would be times when I would open the cabinet and there would be little to no food, or there would be a can of tuna fish and a can of corn or something like that. Not only did I not really know how to prepare those things, but this is feeding 3 children, me and 2 other children. And what kids do you know that want to eat tuna and corn for dinner? Like, not many that I know. So, it came down to those problems. And then also, I was speaking up about stuff that was making me angry. I was starting to find a little bit of my own voice. And one day I confronted her about how, like, the kitchen had rotten food in it and she needed to clean it out and something like that. And she didn't like what I said, so she threw a pan at my head. And the pan is cast iron pan, hit me square in the head, hurt like hell. And that was kind of like my breaking point. So I started telling my brother, who at the time was my boyfriend, now he's my brother, about it. And he ended up telling our mom, and she got involved and kind of started hearing what was going on. And then one night I was home alone playing mom with the other 2 kids, and she was out gallivanting somewhere, and we didn't have anything to eat for dinner. I think that there had been like a couple of packets of like rice or something, but I didn't know how to cook it. So I was on the phone crying, talking to my now brother, then boyfriend, and he related to our mom, and she ordered us pizzas and had it sent over so that we had something to eat that was, kids like, and, wasn't just a bag of rice or something like that. And that was kind of like the line that was drawn in the sand. From there, stuff changed really, really quickly. And it ended up, I'm not even sure, a lot of it was just such a blur. I was spending so much time at the funny farm, and it kind of became like one night they're just sitting there, and I would assume that the conversations were had when I wasn't there, because they had already had this whole speech kind of planned, and they kind of just looked at me and said, like, do you want to be part of our family? And if you do, we want to have you, and we want you to come live here and be our daughter. And it was the safest I have ever felt in my entire life, since my mom passed away, was during that conversation. And I finally felt like I was going to have a real family. And there was definitely a lot to navigate. It's not normal, probably not healthy, and not usual for a 14 and 16-year-old high school couple to start living together. And there were definitely a lot of adjustments for everybody, for my other brother, and for my sister, and for my parents, and it's not easy waters to navigate. So then later on down the road, my brother and I ended up breaking up, which sounds so weird. But my then boyfriend at the time and I ended up breaking up, and he transitioned with a lot of time and work and space and patience into my brother. And that's how I view him today, is I have two brothers and a sister, and that kind of transformed into like more of a normal family dynamic. Not that it'll ever be 100% normal. I think that's impossible for it to be 100% normal, but as close to normal as it will be, kind of transitioned into that, and they have just been my forever family. And we always say, my mom always says that God dropped me off. She had 3 kids, and then God dropped her 4th one off at the door, me. And there's a whole nother set of challenges that comes with that type of dynamic. I would say probably for the first like year and a half to 2 years, it was pretty normal and blissful, and everybody was happy. And the harder challenges came after my then boyfriend, now brother, and I broke up, and they kind of had to navigate dealing with a teenage breakup, as well as giving us both time to grow and heal and space to do so, as well as also still caring for us as their children, and also being involved with each other. We were still a family. We were still family dynamic. We still had Christmas parties to go to and birthdays to celebrate. And that was probably one of the most difficult times. And that's when I was 17, 18. And I started lashing out a little bit. The trauma that I had gone through my entire life up until then, the way I see it is I felt safe enough to feel all of those feelings. I've always been the person that laughs it off and like pushes it down, and like I will be the first person in the room to make a joke about my dead mom. And a lot of people find that strange and cruel and weird and wrong, but that's just how I've always dealt with things. And my family gave me a safe that was space enough, a space that was safe enough, excuse me, to feel everything that I had been bottling up for the past 17 years. And today we still say that, like, you don't undo 17 years in 5. It takes a lot longer than that. So there were times where my mom and I would get into fights. My dad and I would get into fights. My sister probably hated me. Nope, she did hate me for a certain portion of those first years, but that's okay. And there was a lot of different dynamics to kind of figure out. There were times where my brother and I were fist fighting on the kitchen floor because they were raised to be better than that, and to have more respect than that, and to have more manners than that, and I wasn't. And I only knew how to use anger to hurt people, to try to manipulate and get my way. So that was kind of like when the beginning of my healing journey kind of started. I was never diagnosed with any sort of anxiety or depression, even though I would bet my life that I've had it. And now I've been diagnosed with anxiety, so I know for sure I have that. But kind of like the moral to this long rambling story is that not only do I want y'all to know my story so that you can understand me a little bit better and understand where I'm coming from, and why I care about mental health and trauma. And a lot like my sister, I've recently been trying to advocate a little bit more. I think, actually, let me rephrase that. Because of my sister, I've been trying to advocate for it more. Seeing her able to kind of just be raw and put herself out there has made me feel braver to do the same, and realized how important it is, because there are times where I wonder, like, if I had been healthier mentally and healed better mentally, would I have been able to like help her through her own trauma a little bit better? Because right now I'm still trying to figure out my own shit sometimes. So it's all a process. But I wanted y'all to know my story so you can understand why it's important to me, where I'm coming from, why I feel like I can talk about some of these things, because I've experienced them. And also, it's just important to be able to tell people the story. My biological family are all pretty much estranged from each other, and they like to pretend that everything is happy-go-lucky and no one's feelings have ever been hurt. And I'm not saying that they're terrible people or that they all are bad or that they all do evil things. That's not the case at all. But um, it goes right along with that, the generational trauma and the generational mental health problems. And I want that generational trauma and problems and mental health and abuse, I want that to stop with me. I don't want my daughter to ever experience any of those things. And a lot of my cousins, I think that they're doing pretty good for themselves and that they haven't had to experience those things. But it's important to talk about, and it's important to be open and honest about it. Both of the uncles and my immediate uncles, my mom's brothers, they both killed themselves. They both have committed suicide. So mental health is ingrained into my family's history and story. And it's so important to talk about. It's so important to feel like you can tell your story without being judged. I'm the person, I'll be the first to admit that when something goes wrong in my life, or someone does something to me that upsets me, well, you don't know my story. You don't know what I've been through. And while there are other problems to that type of mentality, part of it is true. And if more people were able to talk about what they have been through without being judged when they're comfortable doing so, then I think that a lot of those types of mentalities and problems would be solved. And I think it's also important to hold people accountable. Like I said, my biological family, they act like nothing happened. Some of them, I know it's never been said to me, but I know that some of them think that I'm a liar and full of shit, and that I made up half of the stuff that I've just explained in this video. I know some of them half believe me, and some of them are also like, well, it happened. What are you going to do about it? And I sit there sometimes and I look in the mirror and I'm like, you do know that your son, cousin, nephew, whatever they may be to you, sexually assaulted me. He might not be a pedophile, but he was at one point. That's exactly what that was. When he did all of those things, he was 16 years old. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly that it was wrong. I'm not saying that you can't heal from those things and that you can't become a better person, but none of them acknowledge that. None of them think that that's important today to still talk about. And none of them consider, when they do reach out to me, which is very, very few and far between, or when they like posts on Facebook or something like that, none of them realize that when I see my family's name, when I see the picture of them, when I see them post about, oh, my so-and-so this, so-and-so that, and I'm trying to very vaguely describe things to you because the intent of this is not to point fingers or blame. It's more just to create an open conversation. But when I see those things, that's an instant reminder. I don't think like, oh, so-and-so liked my picture. How sweet. I think they liked my picture. That's weird. Like, isn't it weird that they don't acknowledge that one of their family members, who they're still in contact with at times, sexually assaulted another one of their family members? He wasn't like a 10-year-old little boy that was curious. He was 16 years old. He knew exactly what he was doing, and that's not okay. And there's other things that they've done. That I have a family member who asked me questions very recently. I got a text. Do you know the address to this place? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know it. I can try to find it for you. Well, so-and-so needs it. And that so-and-so ended up being the ex-girlfriend, ex-wife, the abusive one. And they were asking me for an address for her. Never once did they stop to think, why would Kayla want to help her? Why would Kayla want to be a part of this conversation? Is there someone better than I can ask? And there's kind of like they just don't get it. They don't acknowledge it. They don't remember it. They don't believe it. It's not their, again, it's not that they're bad people. It's just the generational trauma and mental health problems. And I'm not going to let my daughter be a part of that. And I don't want to be a part of that anymore. So with all this being said, that's my story. And I'm sure there will be plenty of questions and so on and so forth along the way. But we really just want to, my sister kind of said it in her story video too, is that we want to help people. We want to bring awareness. We want to bring acceptance. We want it to be more normal to say, yeah, when I was 10, I was sexually assaulted. If that's what you're comfortable with, that should be okay. You should be okay to say that. And there's so much stigma still around mental health in general, not just sexual assault or any specific thing. There's so much stigma. When you can't even get certain jobs if you admit that you've been depressed. And why is that? Why is that if someone has mental illness and mental health problems, it doesn't matter if they're working on themselves. It doesn't matter if it's in the past and now it's under control and they are dealing with it either with medication or counseling or meditation or whatever they're doing. It doesn't matter. It's so stigmatized. And my sister's kind of testimony about the people that have reached out to her and said, like, you have helped me and it's good to not be alone, kind of just shows the importance of why this is still necessary. And I think we see celebrities and people of stature all the time talking about this type of stuff. But one, a lot of it is accompanied by an ad. You see the post on Instagram, oh, my mental health, depression, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not saying that their stories aren't valid, but then you see the hashtag ad and it's for a counseling app or something like that. It makes it feel untruthful and fake. And we can't relate to celebrities and people that are rich and people that have unlimited resources. I relate to people that are like me, that are new moms, that are adopted, that are recovering and trying to find themselves. I don't relate to freaking celebrities posting on Instagram about the struggles that they've gone through. Not that they're invalid, not that they're not real, but it's just not the same. So we really hope that this will be able to bring some light into the world of mental health and create conversations and be a place for resources and a place where people can just tell their stories if they want to, and talk about it, because it's very liberating to be able to talk about it. And yeah, so stay tuned. We got a lot of ideas and things that we want to do to try to bring more awareness and acceptance to mental health and all.